What if I told you that one of the most glamorous, picture-perfect weddings in Hollywood history, the union of Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco, was nearly overshadowed by a shocking intrusion no one could have predicted? Imagine the scene. Celebrities dressed in their best, cameras flashing, love in the air, when suddenly the mood shifts. Whispers ripple through the crowd. Guests turn their heads. And there she is, Meghan Markle, stepping into a wedding she was never meant to attend. Sounds like the opening scene of a scandalous film, doesn't it? But this wasn't scripted, and it wasn't staged. It was raw, real, and humiliating. The question is, why did Meghan think she could pull this off? And perhaps even more puzzling, why did Selena Gomez, one of the most beloved stars of her generation, decide enough was enough and call security to remove Meghan in front of everyone? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Already you're probably asking yourself, was this just a misunderstanding? A desperate attempt by Meghan to remain relevant in a Hollywood that seems to have closed its doors on her? Or was this the final nail in the coffin of her fragile reputation among the world's biggest stars? Hold that thought, because this story isn't as simple as Meghan showing up uninvited. Oh no, it's layered with years of tension, power plays, and quiet rejections that finally erupted in one unforgettable moment. Picture the atmosphere before the chaos. Selena and Benny's wedding was destined to be one of the grandest spectacles in celebrity culture. Think about it. Selena Gomez, a global pop icon, admired not only for her music, but also for her authenticity and resilience, finally tying the knot with Benny Blanco, a music producer who'd worked with the industry's greatest names. Guests were expecting glitz, joy, maybe a few tears during the vows, but not the clash of two worlds, Hollywood's sweetheart versus the Duchess of controversy. Now, let's pause for a second. Why does this matter to you? Because it's not just about a wedding. It's about what happens when two reputations collide, one adored and respected, the other increasingly criticized and questioned. Meghan Markle has spent years trying to build her brand as a global icon, but time and time again she finds herself at the center of scandals, whispers, and humiliations. This wedding humiliation isn't just gossip. It's symbolic of her larger struggle to belong in circles that seem determined to keep her out. Let's take a step back. Think of Meghan's trajectory, from actress to duchess, to exiled, royal, to Hollywood hopeful. Every chapter of her life has been marked by ambition and resistance. Every room she walks into, she seems to fight for validation. And yet, validation slips further away. When you put her next to someone like Selena Gomez, who has built a career not on controversy, but on relatability and resilience, the contrast is stark. Selena doesn't need to fight for the spotlight. She owns it. Meghan, on the other hand, seems to chase it desperately, even when it means walking into places she isn't wanted. Now, I know what you're thinking. Did Meghan really crash Selena's wedding? Was she truly not invited? And if so, why would she take that risk? Here's where the story takes a darker, almost tragic turn. Meghan's relationship with Hollywood hasn't been what she expected after stepping back from royal life. The big roles, the top-tier invites, the warm embrace of the industry, none of that fully materialized. Instead, she's faced cancellations, deals falling through, whispers of arrogance, and public criticism. She's fighting against the tide, and this wedding incident symbolizes just how far she's willing to go to stay in the narrative. But let's not underestimate Selena in all of this. Selena Gomez has worked hard to protect her peace, her reputation, and her boundaries. Her wedding wasn't just about saying, "I do." It was about celebrating love, unity, and her own resilience after years of public health battles, heartbreak, and scrutiny. For Meghan to walk into that moment, uninvited, wasn't just rude. It was seen by many as a betrayal of Hollywood etiquette, an invasion of a sacred boundary. And Selena, unlike others who might have stayed silent, chose to act. Imagine being in that room. Guests murmuring, phones buzzing with shocked texts, eyes darting back and forth between the bride and the unexpected intruder. Meghan probably thought she could blend in, that her presence would add star power to the event. But instead, it set the stage for one of the most humiliating moments of her career. Now ask yourself, how did we get here? Why did Selena feel the need to involve security, of all things, instead of quietly brushing the incident under the rug? That's what makes this story so explosive. It's not just about Meghan showing up. It's about Selena saying, with her actions, not at my wedding. Not today. Not ever. And here's where the emotional weight hits. This wasn't Meghan being turned away at a red carpet event. This wasn't a quiet disinvitation to a dinner party. This was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, being physically removed from a celebration of love by one of the most beloved women in entertainment. The symbolism couldn't be sharper. Let me ask you this. What does humiliation feel like when it happens in front of the most powerful names in Hollywood? Meghan didn't just face rejection. She faced rejection in a room where every move, every glance, every whisper would become tomorrow's headline. But here's the thing. We're only scratching the surface. Because the real question isn't just what happened at the wedding. It's about what led up to it. What tensions were already brewing between Selena and Meghan? What had Meghan been doing in the days and weeks before that made Selena so adamant about her boundaries? And most importantly, what does this moment mean for Meghan's future in Hollywood? Keep this in mind. In the world of celebrity, moments like this aren't forgotten. They linger. They become legends. And for Meghan, this wedding humiliation might be remembered not as a simple mistake, but as the turning point that cemented her outsider status. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into the media firestorm, the fallout, and the behind-the-scenes whispers, we need to go back. Back to the very beginning of the event. Back to the fairy tale wedding setup that was supposed to be perfect until Meghan Markle walked through those doors. Because if you think the shock of her arrival was bad, wait until you hear what happened next. It was the wedding everyone had been talking about for months. The kind of event that felt larger than life. The kind that made headlines before a single guest even stepped onto the carpet. Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco were about to tie the knot, and Hollywood was ready to turn out in full force. Think glitz, think glamour, think the biggest names across music, film, and fashion gathering in one place. This was meant to be a fairy tale, a love story culminating in an unforgettable celebration. But beneath the sparkle of designer gowns and champagne flutes, something else was brewing. Something no one could have predicted. A storm was about to arrive in the form of a woman who has, time and time again, walked into rooms determined to claim her place, even when the room doesn't want her there. Meghan Markle. Let's set the scene first. The venue itself was breathtaking. Nestled in a sprawling estate just outside Los Angeles, the wedding had the kind of opulence that you only see in movies. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above tables dressed in ivory linens. Orchids cascaded down golden centerpieces. Guests sipped cocktails mixed by world-class bartenders, while the soft hum of a string quartet filled the air. Everything about it screamed exclusivity, perfection, control. And in Hollywood, control is everything. The guest list was a who's who of stardom. Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, The Weeknd, and even directors like Martin Scorsese were whispered to be in attendance. Every face seemed familiar because every face belonged to someone who had built a legacy in their craft. These were people who didn't just attend events, they defined them. Selena and Benny's wedding wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a cultural moment. And this is where the contrast starts to burn. You see, Meghan Markle wasn't on that guest list. Not officially, not even unofficially. There was no monogrammed invitation with her name on it. No RSVP card returned to a wedding planner's office. But somehow, her presence would still come to dominate the night. Why? Because in Meghan's world, being excluded has never been an option. Ask yourself this. How far would you go if the doors to the most important rooms in Hollywood were quietly closing on you? Would you fight harder to get in, or would you step back gracefully? For Meghan, the answer has always been the former. This wedding, to her, wasn't just about celebrating love. It was about reclaiming relevance. But let's not jump ahead just yet. Back to the setup. From the very beginning, security was airtight. Guests were screened, IDs double-checked, cars logged. Privacy was paramount. After all, this wasn't just any wedding. This was Selena Gomez's wedding. She has one of the most devoted fan bases in the world. Millions of eyes waiting to see the photos, the dress, the details. The last thing anyone wanted was a disruption. And yet, the seeds of disruption were already being sown. Meghan had been spotted in Los Angeles in the days leading up to the wedding. Paparazzi photos showed her shopping in Beverly Hills, sipping coffee at a trendy cafe, even visiting a stylist rumored to have ties to some of Selena's inner circle. Was it coincidence? Was it strategy? Or was Meghan quietly making her move toward a day that wasn't hers? Meanwhile, Selena was radiant. Her dress, a custom creation from one of Europe's most exclusive fashion houses, shimmered as she moved. She laughed, she cried, she danced with Benny in rehearsals. The bride was glowing, and so was her circle. There was no room for drama, or at least, there wasn't supposed to be. But weddings have a way of exposing truths, don't they? Family tensions, old rivalries, unspoken feuds, they all seem to rise to the surface when love is center stage. And here, in the middle of what was supposed to be a flawless Hollywood spectacle, Meghan's shadow was beginning to stretch across the scene. Think about it. Everyone in attendance had worked hard to be there. They'd built careers, forged relationships, earned their invitations. Meghan, however, had walked a different path. From television actress to royal, then back to a Hollywood hopeful. Her story has always been about disruption. Some admired her for it, others resented her. But no one ignored her. And that's precisely why her arrival would become the night's defining moment. Still, before she entered, the mood was pure magic. Guests toasted, laughter echoed across the courtyard, and cameras discreetly snapped candid moments of joy. It was as if the world outside didn't exist. All that mattered was Selena and Benny, their story, their future. For a brief moment, it was perfect. And yet, perfection in Hollywood rarely lasts. Especially when Meghan Markle is on the periphery. Let me ask you this. What do you think happens when someone who has spent years building an image of being excluded suddenly inserts herself into a space she was intentionally left out of? Does the crowd welcome her? Do they whisper? Do they watch in silence as the tension unfolds? Because on that night, at that wedding, the answer wasn't simple acceptance. It was shock. It was disbelief. It was the kind of awkward electricity that spreads like wildfire, where everyone feels the moment is about to tip, but no one knows how far it will go. As the orchestra played a gentle melody and the cameras turned toward the bride, the first murmurs began. Heads tilted toward the entrance. Phones slid out discreetly. Something was happening. Something that didn't belong. And when Meghan finally crossed that threshold, when she stepped into the fairy tale world crafted so carefully for Selena and Benny, the spell was broken. But what Meghan didn't realize was this. Her entrance wasn't the grand reclaiming of power she imagined. It was the beginning of her greatest Hollywood humiliation. And it all started with that one step into the wedding she was never supposed to attend. Because what came next, Selena's reaction, the whispers in the crowd, and the moment security was called, would change everything. Who really makes the cut when Hollywood's elite throw a wedding? That's the question that quietly hung in the air even before Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco said their vows. A guest list isn't just a piece of paper. It's a declaration of allegiance, a statement of who matters and who doesn't. And for Meghan Markle, being left off that list wasn't just exclusion. It was rejection, loud and clear. Let's start with the circle itself. Selena's inner circle is more than just friends. It's her fortress. For years, she's surrounded herself with people who have seen her at her highest highs and her lowest lows. Think Taylor Swift, her ride or die through nearly every public battle. Think Francia Raisa, the woman who once donated a kidney to save Selena's life, even if their friendship has had its rocky moments. Think about her extended network of collaborators, co-stars, and confidants who have stayed with her through breakups, health scares, and global stardom. These people weren't just invited to the wedding. They were essential to it. Now, compare that to Meghan Markle's network. Once upon a time, she seemed poised to slide into Hollywood's most exclusive circles with ease. After all, she had the royal title, the celebrity husband, the Netflix deals, and the potential to become America's Princess Diana 2.0. But the reality? The connections didn't stick. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. Former allies grew quiet. And in a city where loyalty is currency, Meghan's reputation began to look like a liability. So when the guest list for Selena's wedding began to circulate in the media, it spoke volumes. It wasn't just about who was there. It was about who wasn't. No Meghan. No Harry. No Sussex representation of any kind. And that absence was telling. It wasn't just an oversight. It was intentional. But let's dig deeper. Why would Selena, a woman who is known for her empathy and kindness, draw such a firm line when it came to Meghan? The answer, insiders suggest, comes down to reputation management. Selena's brand thrives on authenticity. Her fans adore her because she feels real, relatable, untainted by the games of Hollywood politics. Meghan, on the other hand, has become synonymous with controversy. From royal feuds to Netflix critiques to public fallout with family, her name carries baggage. And at a wedding that was supposed to represent pure joy and unity, baggage was the last thing Selena wanted. Still, Meghan doesn't see things the same way. To her, exclusion isn't just a slight, it's a challenge. Sources whisper that Meghan had expected an invitation, that she believed she belonged in those seats beside the most powerful women in entertainment. After all, wasn't she a duchess? Wasn't she supposed to be part of the world's most exclusive inner circles? But here's the contradiction. Meghan wants to be embraced by Hollywood, while simultaneously rejecting the very rules that govern it. In Hollywood, loyalty and timing matter. Meghan's timing, however, has often been disastrous. Now picture the atmosphere at the wedding again. Taylor Swift, glowing and charismatic, moves through the room as if she owns it. Francia Raisa shares warm hugs with Selena's family, her presence a reminder of the sacrifices real friendship requires. Even celebrities like Ariana Grande and Demi Lovato, who've had their share of ups and downs with Selena, were spotted smiling and supportive. Everyone there had a reason, a connection, a history. They belonged. And then imagine Meghan watching all of this unfold from the outside, scrolling through the media coverage, seeing faces she'd once hoped to align with, and realizing her name was nowhere to be found. That sting of not being wanted was the fire that would fuel her fateful decision to show up anyway. Here's where things get more complicated. Some sources claim Meghan reached out to mutual acquaintances in the days before the wedding, trying to gauge if she could swing by. Others suggest she tried to use connections through fashion houses, assuming her appearance would be welcomed if she showed up dressed by the right designer. But no matter the angle, the response was the same: silence. Meghan wasn't on the list, and she wasn't going to be added. Let me ask you, what does it say about someone when silence becomes their loudest rejection? Meghan has always branded herself as someone who breaks boundaries, someone who doesn't wait for permission. But in this case, what she read as a challenge, Selena's circle read as a final line in the sand. And make no mistake, Selena's circle was watching. Hollywood is a town built on whispers, and every whisper said the same thing: keep Meghan at arm's length. Not because she wasn't interesting, not because she wasn't powerful once, but because she had become unpredictable. And unpredictability is poison in a world where image is everything. So when the guests gathered on that perfect California day, when Selena glided into the room glowing with joy, the absence of Meghan Markle wasn't just a detail. It was a statement. The message was clear. Selena's wedding was about love, about unity, about authenticity, and Meghan Markle didn't fit that narrative. But here's where it gets really fascinating. When Meghan realized she wasn't wanted, she didn't retreat. She doubled down. To her, being excluded wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. And the decision she made next would ignite the drama no one at Selena's wedding saw coming. Because for Meghan, crashing the wedding wasn't just about showing up. It was about showing the world she still mattered. And in her mind, she was about to prove it. But what Meghan didn't realize was that Selena's circle was more protective, more loyal, and more unshakable than she ever expected. And when those two forces collided, the Duchess desperate for relevance, and the bride determined to protect her moment, what followed would be nothing short of explosive. What happens when someone who once sat at the center of global attention suddenly finds themselves on the outside looking in? That's the story of Meghan Markle in Hollywood right now. And if you really want to understand why she walked into Selena Gomez's wedding despite not being invited, you have to dig into that desperation. The gnawing need to be relevant in a world that has all but shut her out. Think back to the moment Meghan and Harry left royal life behind. The headlines were everywhere. They were young, charismatic, and rebellious, striking out on their own. They talked about financial independence, global causes, and a new era of influence. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. At first, it seemed like they had Hollywood in the palm of their hands. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. The glitter faded fast. The Netflix deal, hyped as groundbreaking, hasn't lived up to its promise. Their Spotify deal ended with whispers of low productivity, and creative differences. The brand partnerships that Meghan and Harry dreamed of aligning with, many fizzled out before they ever took off. Meghan's projects, like her podcast archetypes, had moments of attention but never cemented her as a powerhouse voice. And in Hollywood, if you don't deliver, you're forgotten. Now, contrast that with Selena Gomez. Selena has had her own struggles, health battles, public heartbreak, even a kidney transplant. And yet, she's turned vulnerability into strength. She's built an empire with rare beauty, one of the most successful celebrity brands in the market. She starred in a hit Hulu series, Only Murders in the Building, winning awards and rave reviews. She's adored, respected, and perhaps most importantly, trusted. Hollywood embraces her because she feels authentic. That authenticity is what Meghan has never quite managed to capture. Instead, her public image has become clouded by contradictions. She champions compassion, yet critics say she alienates her own family. She speaks of wanting privacy, yet frequently seeks the spotlight. She wants to be seen as a feminist role model, yet many accuse her of using relationships as stepping stones. Each contradiction chips away at the credibility she craves. So where does this leave her? On the outside, watching as women like Selena thrive in the very world she wants to dominate. And for Meghan, exclusion is unbearable. Imagine scrolling through social media, seeing pictures of Hollywood's biggest names laughing, celebrating, glowing, and realizing you're not part of it. Meghan, who once walked red carpets and waved from palace balconies, has become an outsider. That's where the desperation creeps in. Because for Meghan, staying relevant isn't just about fame. It's survival. Fame fuels her brand, her deals, her influence. Without it, the empire she and Harry are trying to build crumbles. That's why every photo op, every interview, every calculated public appearance feels so critical. Each one is an attempt to remind the world, I still matter. Now, put yourself in Meghan's shoes in the days before Selena's wedding. The buzz was everywhere. Social media was buzzing with speculation about the guest list. Paparazzi were camping outside designers' showrooms, hoping to spot glimpses of gowns headed to the big event. Meghan must have felt it, the pull of being left out of something monumental. She knew the photos would circulate, the coverage would dominate the news cycle, and her absence would be loud. What do you do when absence feels like erasure? For Meghan, the answer was simple: you don't stay absent. You insert yourself, by any means necessary. And here's the irony. Meghan has always positioned herself as someone who breaks rules, someone who doesn't wait for permission. So in her mind, showing up wasn't crashing the wedding. It was taking what she believed she deserved, a seat at the table. But in reality, it wasn't empowerment. It was desperation disguised as confidence. This is where the tension between perception and reality becomes so striking. To Meghan, her arrival might have felt like a statement. I'm still here. I'm still relevant. But to everyone else, it looked like overreach. Like a desperate grasp at a spotlight that no longer wanted her. Ask yourself this. Have you ever seen someone try too hard to fit into a room, only to make themselves stand out in all the wrong ways? That was Meghan on Selena's wedding day. While the rest of the guests belonged effortlessly, Meghan's presence screamed of effort, of a woman unwilling to accept exclusion, even when it was clear. And let's not ignore the emotional undercurrent. Meghan has spoken many times about rejection, about being misunderstood, about being silenced. But here, the rejection wasn't subtle. It was loud, undeniable, and public. Not only was she not invited, her very presence would trigger a confrontation so humiliating it would overshadow everything else. That's the tragic part of this story. Because in Meghan's pursuit of relevance, she ended up achieving the opposite. Instead of being seen as a powerful, independent figure reclaiming her place in Hollywood, she became the cautionary tale of what happens when desperation takes the wheel. And the saddest irony? The very people Meghan wanted to impress, the Hollywood elite seated in that room, were the same people who watched her be escorted out. The move meant to reassert her relevance only confirmed her exclusion. But before we get to that humiliating climax, let's pause. Because the true turning point wasn't the security call. It wasn't Selena's anger. It was Meghan's entrance, the moment she decided to walk into a wedding she didn't belong to. That single step set the stage for everything that followed. And when she crossed that threshold, she wasn't just entering a room. She was walking into the moment that would define her Hollywood downfall. Because what happened next, Selena's icy reaction, the whispers that spread like wildfire, the decision to involve security, was the kind of drama no one saw coming. It began with a stir. A wedding so carefully orchestrated, so meticulously guarded, had run like clockwork up until this moment. The champagne had been poured. The orchestra played softly in the background. Selena was glowing, Benny was radiant, and the guests were basking in a fairy tale scene. Then, without warning, the first ripple broke through the polished calm. A murmur, a shift in the air. Heads turned toward the entrance, eyes squinting in disbelief. And there she was, Meghan Markle. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The chatter fell into an awkward hush, the way it does when something happens that no one quite knows how to respond to. It wasn't that Meghan wasn't recognizable. Everyone knew who she was. But recognition quickly gave way to confusion, and confusion gave way to unease. Because Meghan's presence was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. She didn't slip quietly into the room. Meghan never does. She made her entrance with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged there. A tailored gown, rumored to be custom door, hugged her figure, and she carried herself like she was stepping onto a red carpet rather than intruding on a private, intimate wedding. Her smile was poised, her wave subtle, as if this was just another event in which she was meant to be front and center. But here's the question: what happens when confidence collides with reality? Guests exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered behind napkins, others raised their phones, trying to capture the moment discreetly. There was a crackle of electricity, that awkward tension that builds when something isn't right, but no one wants to be the first to react. And all the while, Meghan walked forward as if she were utterly unfazed, as if she couldn't feel the icy chill in the air. Selena noticed immediately. How could she not? The bride, radiant in her gown, her hand resting in Benny's, suddenly froze. Her smile faltered just slightly. For Selena, this was supposed to be her moment, her day, her joy. And now, across the aisle, stood a woman whose reputation brought nothing but headlines and baggage. And Benny? Observers said his jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Selena for reassurance. The groom, who had worked hard to keep his wedding a drama-free celebration, was suddenly faced with a storm he hadn't invited. This is where the build-up takes a sharp turn. Meghan didn't just stand at the entrance, waiting for acknowledgement. She moved with purpose, weaving between tables, making her way deeper into the celebration. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, others turned away, unsure of whether to greet her or pretend they hadn't seen her. Because here's the thing, ignoring Meghan Markle is nearly impossible. She demands attention by her very presence. But here's the contradiction. The harder she tried to blend in, the more out of place she looked. The other guests had an ease about them, a belonging that radiated from familiarity and genuine connection. Meghan, by contrast, looked like she was performing. Every gesture seemed calculated, every glance rehearsed, as though she believed cameras were on her, even though this was supposed to be a private, sacred space. Think about it. What's more jarring than someone treating your wedding like a stage? For Selena and her guests, Meghan's behavior wasn't just confusing. It was disrespectful, and the whispers grew louder. Some guests leaned toward each other, muttering, "Was she invited? Why is she here? Does Selena know?" Phones buzzed with messages between tables, the digital equivalent of gasps rippling through the crowd. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. And still, Meghan pressed forward. She greeted one or two acquaintances with air kisses, but those interactions were stiff, awkward, lacking the warmth that characterized the rest of the evening. It was as though she was hoping that simply moving among the crowd would cement her place there, that people would eventually accept her presence if she acted natural. But natural wasn't the word anyone would use to describe the moment. And then, it happened. Selena locked eyes with her. Eyewitnesses say the room shifted in that instant. Selena's expression, once full of joy, hardened into something else. Surprise, irritation, and yes, hurt. This was her day, her moment. And in an instant, Meghan had turned the spotlight toward herself. Now, imagine being Selena Gomez at that moment. You've fought for years to protect your peace, to create boundaries in an industry that tries to strip you of them. You've finally reached a day of pure celebration, surrounded by people you trust, only to see someone you didn't invite walking confidently into your sacred space. What do? Do you ignore it? Pretend it isn't happening? Or do you confront it head-on? Selena, ever the composed professional, didn't make a scene right away. She watched, she waited, she assessed. But her silence wasn't acceptance, it was calculation. She knew this wasn't a situation she could let slide. Because if Meghan stayed, the wedding wouldn't be remembered for its love story. It would be remembered for its drama. And Selena wasn't going to let that happen. By this point, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What started as laughter and lightness had curdled into whispers and tension. Guests were no longer focused on the couple, but on the woman who had walked in uninvited. The orchestra's music, still playing in the background, felt strangely out of place against the unease. And Meghan? She seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully so. To her, this wasn't humiliation. Not yet. This was presence. This was proof she could still command a room. In her mind, her arrival had shifted the narrative. In reality, it had fractured it. Because the moment Selena made her decision, calmly, firmly, and without hesitation, the tide would turn in a way Meghan couldn't have anticipated. And as Meghan moved deeper into the celebration, smiling as though nothing were wrong, Selena signaled quietly to someone in her circle. The bride had just decided enough was enough. And what happened next would leave the room stunned. It started softly, like the faint rustling of leaves before a storm. A whisper here, a gasp there. Small, subtle signs that the room's perfect harmony had been disrupted. Selena's wedding had been gliding along as a flawless fairy tale until Meghan Markle appeared, and now, the once golden atmosphere carried a sharp edge. Guests who moments earlier were laughing into champagne glasses now leaned toward one another, hands covering mouths, eyes darting nervously toward the uninvited Duchess. Whispers in Hollywood spread faster than wildfire. And in that room, filled with some of the world's most influential names, every murmur mattered. Was she invited? One guest whispered to another, their eyes narrowing in suspicion. No way, came the quick reply, tinged with incredulity. Selena wouldn't. Not her. Phones buzzed under tables, messages firing off to friends and assistants outside. You won't believe this. Meghan Markle just walked in. One attendee typed furiously, "Security is gonna have to deal with this. No way Selena's okay with it." Screens lit up like fireflies in the dimmed wedding hall, proof that Meghan's presence was already spreading beyond those walls. And that's the thing about whispers. They grow. They take shape. They become something tangible. Within minutes, Meghan had become the gravitational pull of the room, an uninvited guest whose shadow loomed larger than the bride's. And for a bride like Selena Gomez, who had spent her life fighting to maintain authenticity and peace in an industry that devours both, this intrusion wasn't just rude. It was a betrayal of the moment she had fought to protect. But let's focus on the guests for a second. Imagine being Taylor Swift, one of Selena's closest friends, watching the scene unfold. Taylor, who knows all too well what it's like to have moments stolen, leaned in towards Selena's family, her expression tightening. Reports suggest she whispered something sharp, her eyes never leaving Meghan. Then there was Francia Raisa, her history with Selena complicated but undeniable. Witnesses claimed she shook her head, muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. The whispers weren't just about Meghan's arrival. They were about what it meant. Every guest in that room understood the politics of Hollywood invitations. To not be invited was one thing. To show up anyway? That was a declaration, a defiance of the unspoken rules that governed their world. And the irony was thick. Meghan, who has built a reputation on speaking about boundaries, about personal respect, about dignity, was now the one bulldozing all three. Still, Meghan moved forward as though the whispers didn't exist. She smiled politely, exchanged brief greetings with a couple of acquaintances, even nodded toward one of the photographers discreetly capturing the event. But every step she took seemed to intensify the murmurs, to deepen the collective unease. The orchestra continued its melody, but the notes felt hollow against the tension. "Why is she here?" One guest muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "She wasn't invited." Another added, almost gleefully, "Selena's not going to let this slide." And they were right. Because while Meghan might have thought her confidence could carry her through, the whispers were already reaching Selena herself. Eyewitnesses say Selena glanced at her bridesmaids, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. Her smile was fixed for the cameras, but anyone who knew her could see the shift. The whispers had reached her ears, and she wasn't going to ignore them. The betrayal felt deeper because of the symbolism. This was a wedding, a sacred celebration of love. To walk into it uninvited wasn't just a social faux pas. It was a violation, and the crowd knew it. The whispers grew louder, morphing into subtle gasps as Meghan moved closer to the bride. And here's the contradiction that makes the moment so unforgettable. Meghan has always painted herself as the misunderstood outsider, the woman unfairly excluded from spaces of power. But in this moment, the whispers didn't cast her as a victim. They cast her as the villain, the woman who disrupted joy with her need to be seen. Think about the psychology of a room like that. When dozens of high-powered, high-profile people all sense something is wrong, it creates a domino effect. Whispers feed whispers. Tension breeds tension. By the time Meghan reached the center of the room, she wasn't just another guest. She was the scandal everyone was already talking about, even before the confrontation began. And Meghan must have felt it. She must have seen the glances, heard the murmurs, sensed the disapproval. But instead of retreating, she pressed on. That's the tragedy of her story. She has spent so long fighting to prove she belongs that she no longer knows when to step back. At one table, a Hollywood power couple leaned in close. "Selena's about to shut this down," the woman whispered. Her partner nodded grimly. "She has to." And then, in a moment that silenced the whispers for just a breath, Selena turned her gaze directly to Meghan. Their eyes locked, bride and duchess, authenticity versus ambition. Guests described the silence that followed as electric. Everyone waiting, everyone holding their breath. Would Selena erupt? Would she cause a scene? No, Selena didn't have to. She didn't need to raise her voice or make a public declaration. Instead, she lifted her hand ever so slightly, catching the eye of a trusted member of her team. A subtle signal. A decision made. The whispers swelled again, this time with anticipation, because everyone knew what that signal meant. Selena was about to take control of her wedding, and Meghan Markle had no idea what was coming next. There's a moment every bride dreams about, when she feels completely in control of her day, her love story, her world. For Selena Gomez, that moment was supposed to last the entire wedding. But with Meghan Markle's sudden arrival, that control was slipping away. And Selena, who had spent her entire adult life under scrutiny, was not about to let that happen. She had a choice. Let Meghan's intrusion cast a shadow, or reclaim the spotlight with quiet strength. And make no mistake, Selena chose the latter. From the outside, her reaction seemed almost too calm. The music kept playing, guests kept sipping their champagne, and the laughter resumed in carefully curated pockets. But under the surface, the energy shifted entirely. Selena, the bride who had battled through heartbreak, illness, and the crushing pressure of global fame, wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Meghan Markle, steal her peace. Let's paint the picture. Meghan was making her way toward the center of the room, gliding past tables as though she belonged. The whispers still crackled in the air, a chorus of disbelief and disapproval. Selena's bridesmaids leaned in, their eyes flicking nervously between the bride and the intruder. Even Benny seemed tense, his hand tightening protectively around Selena's. But Selena? She exhaled, her shoulders straightened, and her expression hardened just enough to signal, enough was enough. What's fascinating here is how Selena's reaction revealed the core difference between her and Meghan. Selena has built her reputation on authenticity, on never overplaying her hand. Meghan, on the other hand, has built hers on boldness, on taking up space even when it wasn't offered. In that moment, the contrast was undeniable. Selena didn't storm across the room. She didn't shout. She didn't make a grand scene. Instead, she did what true power looks like. She used subtlety. A glance, a small hand signal, a whispered word to a member of her trusted team. Eyewitnesses later described it as a queen move. Selena barely moved her lips as she leaned toward her maid of honor, murmuring something only a few inches from her ear. Within seconds, her team sprang into quiet action. The signal had been sent. Meghan's presence was no longer to be tolerated. Meanwhile, Meghan was still smiling, still projecting an air of confidence. She seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind, to the storm brewing around her. Some said she looked almost rehearsed, as if she believed she could win over the crowd with her mere presence. But what she didn't realize was that Selena wasn't just another Hollywood starlet. She was a woman fiercely protective of her boundaries. Think about it. Selena has survived the kind of media glare that would destroy most people. She's faced tabloids dissecting her love life, fans analyzing her every move, and paparazzi capturing her at her lowest points. Through it all, she learned one vital lesson: control the narrative before it controls you. And on her wedding day, she wasn't about to let Meghan Markle rewrite her story. The whispers grew sharper now. "She's being dealt with," one guest muttered knowingly. "Selena's not playing games." At another table, a director leaned toward his wife and murmured, "This is going to be the story of the night." And yet, the bride remained serene. To anyone who didn't know what was happening, Selena looked simply radiant, laughing softly as she clutched Benny's hand. But her inner circle knew better. That laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had just taken control. Now let's pause here for a question. What does true humiliation look like? Is it being yelled at in public, shamed loudly for everyone to see? Or is it the quiet, calculated dismissal that leaves no room for argument? For Meghan, humiliation was about to take the latter form. Because Selena wasn't going to waste her breath. She was going to let her actions speak. As Meghan continued to mingle awkwardly, security was already being notified. A pair of staffers, dressed impeccably in black suits, began moving discreetly toward her. They didn't rush. They didn't draw attention. But their presence was unmistakable. The message was clear. Meghan's time inside this fairy tale had run out. And here's where the emotional spike hits. Meghan may have thought her entrance was bold, even defiant. But in reality, her presence only amplified Selena's power. Because Selena didn't have to scream, didn't have to explain. With one subtle decision, she reminded everyone in that room who the true star was. Guests leaned back in their chairs, eyes widening as they realized what was happening. This wasn't just a bride protecting her wedding. This was Selena Gomez sending a message. I choose my peace. I choose my boundaries. And no one, not even Meghan Markle, will cross them. Still, Meghan hadn't fully grasped what was happening. She adjusted her gown, lifted her chin, and even reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. To her, the night was still salvageable. To everyone else, it was over. The silence stretched as the two security staff finally positioned themselves near Meghan. One leaned in, whispering something firmly but quietly. Meghan froze, her glass halfway to her lips. Guests strained to watch without being obvious. The tension was electric. Selena, across the room, smiled again. Not the nervous smile from earlier, but a smile of certainty. The bride had regained her throne. And Meghan? She was about to be faced with the one thing she feared most: public rejection. Because what came next would take humiliation to an entirely new level. It was the moment no one thought they would see. Not at a wedding, not in Hollywood, not with someone like Meghan Markle. The tension that had been building all night finally snapped when Selena Gomez, in the middle of her own fairy tale, made a quiet but unshakable choice. She wasn't going to let Meghan steal the moment. And how did she enforce it? With the one move that turned whispers into shockwaves. She called security. Now picture the scene. Meghan, dressed in her designer gown, standing tall, sipping champagne as if she belonged, while around her the room vibrated with unease. Guests leaned closer to one another, whispering furiously. Selena's team had moved quickly but discreetly, summoning the kind of security that doesn't ask questions, doesn't hesitate, doesn't waver. These weren't bouncers at a nightclub. These were professionals, trained, composed, authoritative. The first sign Meghan had that something was wrong was subtle. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed two figures in black suits approach. They didn't come charging. They didn't raise their voices. They simply positioned themselves in her orbit, making it clear that she was no longer a guest, but a problem to be managed. And here's where the humiliation deepened. Meghan tried to play it cool. She smiled politely, acknowledging the men with a nod, as if they were simply more attendees. But then one leaned in, his voice low, his words sharp. Witnesses later claimed the line was simple, almost surgical. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Can you imagine the sting of that moment? For Meghan, a woman who has spent years crafting an image of influence and power, being quietly escorted out of one of Hollywood's most important weddings wasn't just embarrassing. It was catastrophic. But Meghan didn't give in immediately. No, not her. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and responded with what sources described as icy disbelief. She questioned them. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am?" The words, whispered but audible to those closest, sent another ripple through the crowd. Of course everyone knew who she was. That wasn't the point. The security detail remained calm, unwavering. "This isn't your event," one replied firmly. The line cut through the air like a blade. Gasps followed. Guests leaned back in their chairs, eyes wide, mouths covered in disbelief. Meghan had been confronted, directly, publicly, and undeniably. And all the while, Selena stayed composed. The bride didn't storm across the room. She didn't need to. Her authority echoed through her team, her security, her control. With Benny at her side, she maintained her serenity, smiling faintly for the cameras that discreetly captured every angle. To her guests, she radiated the calm of a woman who refused to let anyone, not even Meghan Markle, shake her foundation. But Meghan wasn't going quietly. Eyewitnesses describe how she attempted to linger, insisting she had every right to be there. She gestured toward acquaintances, as if searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But no one did. Silence answered her pleas. Even those who may have once courted her friendship sat frozen, unwilling to challenge Selena on her own day. That silence was perhaps the deepest cut. In Hollywood, loyalty is everything. And Meghan discovered in that instant that she had none in that room. The security officers stood firm, guiding her toward the exit with professional detachment. Meghan, realizing resistance would only amplify her humiliation, tried to salvage her dignity. She smiled again, as if nothing was wrong, as if this was all a misunderstanding. But the whispers followed her like shadows. "She's being thrown out. Selena kicked her out. I can't believe this is happening." And here's the irony. Meghan thought her entrance would dominate headlines. She thought her presence would demand attention. And it did, but not in the way she intended. Instead of being remembered as a power play, it became a spectacle of rejection. Imagine walking past dozens of Hollywood's most powerful figures, each one watching silently as you're escorted out. Every step Meghan took toward the exit was a step deeper into humiliation. Every glance from a guest, every muffled laugh, every raised phone capturing a blurred image cemented her downfall. Outside, the paparazzi were already waiting. Somehow, as they always do, word had leaked. Cameras flashed, questions were shouted, chaos erupted. "Why were you kicked out? Did Selena have you removed? Were you even invited?" Meghan shielded her face, slipping into a waiting car, her team scrambling to spin what had just happened. But there was no spin strong enough to erase the sight of security escorting her out of Selena Gomez's wedding. Back inside, the atmosphere shifted again. With Meghan gone, the tension broke. Guests exhaled, laughter returned, the orchestra played brighter. Selena and Benny resumed their celebration, their day salvaged by the bride's quiet but decisive control. But the story didn't end at the exit door. Because as Meghan sat in that car, blinds drawn against the flashes, her mind must have been racing. How had it come to this? How had she gone from royal status to being thrown out of a wedding in front of Hollywood's elite? And most importantly, how would she fight back? Because if you think Meghan was going to let the story end with her humiliation, you'd be mistaken. What came after? The media firestorm, the frantic damage control, the leaks and counterleaks, would ensure this moment didn't just end with an exit. It would spiral into something far larger. But on that night, in that room, only one thing mattered. Selena Gomez had drawn a line, and Meghan Markle had been walked over it, by security. And what happened next in the aftermath would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. Humiliation. That was the word echoing through the marble halls and crystal-lit ballroom long after Meghan Markle had been escorted out of Selena Gomez's wedding. For Meghan, humiliation wasn't just about leaving. It was about how she left and who witnessed it. And for everyone inside that room, the memory of her removal wasn't going to fade anytime soon. Let's rewind to that exact moment. Picture Meghan, her chin high, her designer gown flowing behind her, walking stiffly between two silent security staff. Every step echoed against the polished floor, a sound louder than the orchestra, louder than the whispers that now swelled into near-audible shock. She wasn't just leaving. She was being walked out. That difference meant everything. Some guests lowered their eyes, pretending not to look. Others couldn't resist watching, eyes locked, expressions a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. A few even smirked, their lips twitching at the irony of the Duchess of Sussex, once the most photographed woman in the world, being treated not as royalty, but as an intruder. And Meghan? She tried to mask the humiliation. She adjusted her posture, smoothed her dress, forced a smile. But the room knew. Everyone knew. The mask didn't fit anymore. Her smile looked strained, her walk too rigid, her air of composure cracked under the weight of rejection. Ask yourself, what's worse, being told you don't belong, or having an entire room silently agree with it? Because that's what happened to Meghan. The silence of the guests was deafening. No one protested. No one rushed forward to defend her. Even those who had once been friendly, stylists, acquaintances, distant colleagues, stayed seated, watching her pass like spectators at a play. The absence of support was itself a statement. Meghan stood alone. And here's the dagger. Selena didn't even have to move. She didn't have to raise her voice or make a scene. Her quiet, deliberate decision had already rippled through the entire room. By choosing not to confront Meghan herself, but to let security handle it, Selena amplified the message. Meghan didn't deserve even a direct word. She wasn't important enough to warrant it. Think of the irony. Meghan, who left the royal family claiming she wanted to reclaim her voice, now found herself silenced not by words but by action. And actions, as the saying goes, speak louder. The humiliation didn't stop at the exit door. Once outside, the flashing cameras captured the aftermath. Meghan shielding her face, ducking into the sleek black car waiting to whisk her away. Paparazzi shouting questions, lenses clicking furiously. Her image, frozen in those photographs, would soon plaster headlines around the world. Meghan Markle escorted out of Selena's wedding. Selena says no to Meghan. The story practically wrote itself. Inside, the mood shifted the instant Meghan was gone. It was as though the room collectively exhaled. Guests unclenched, smiles returned, laughter bubbled back. Selena, radiant again, leaned into Benny as if reclaiming her joy. The orchestra swelled, champagne glasses clinked, and the fairy tale resumed. But no one could deny the undercurrent. This wedding would forever be remembered for what had just happened. And Meghan knew it. Sitting in that car, curtains drawn against the flashes, she must have felt the weight of it all. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was professional. Because in Hollywood, moments like this stick. They become cautionary tales, whispered at industry dinners, dissected at parties. They define reputations. But Meghan, ever defiant, wasn't going to accept humiliation quietly. Sources close to her later claimed she was furious, seething at what she saw as an unnecessary spectacle. Selena could have handled it differently, she allegedly fumed. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Selena did handle it differently. She handled it with class, calm, and quiet authority. Meghan's anger only underlined the contrast between the two women. And the guests? Their whispers turned into judgments. She shouldn't have been here, one producer muttered. What was she thinking? Another asked, shaking their head. This will follow her, a Hollywood agent whispered knowingly. In that world, perception is reality. And Meghan had just cemented herself as someone who didn't respect boundaries, someone who brought chaos where there should have been celebration. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. There were those who pitied her. Some guests admitted feeling a pang of sympathy watching her walk out, shoulders stiff, pride cracking under the weight of the moment. After all, humiliation cuts deepest when it's public. And this was humiliation at its most public. But pity doesn't erase reputation. Pity doesn't rebuild bridges. Pity doesn't get you invited back into the inner circle. If anything, pity is worse. Because in Hollywood, once people start pitying you instead of respecting you, your star has already dimmed. Here's the haunting part. Meghan wanted this night to prove she still mattered. She thought her arrival would dominate headlines, remind everyone she was still a player in the game. And in a way, it did dominate headlines. But not for the reasons she wanted. Instead of power, the narrative became desperation. Instead of belonging, the story became rejection. Humiliation became her legacy from that night. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because humiliation doesn't end in the moment. It multiplies when the media gets involved. And by morning, the photos, the leaks, the memes would transform Meghan's humiliation into a global spectacle. But Meghan wasn't about to take it lying down. Not her. The woman who had defied royalty wasn't going to sit quietly while Hollywood laughed. She would fight back. She always does. In that fight, her frantic scramble to regain control, her attempts at damage control, would turn humiliation into an all-out media firestorm. Because if you thought being escorted out was bad, wait until you see how the world reacted. By dawn the next morning, the wedding was over, but the humiliation had only just begun. Meghan Markle's name wasn't simply whispered anymore. It was screamed across headlines, plastered on social media feeds, dissected on gossip blogs, and laughed about on morning talk shows. What began as whispers in Selena Gomez's wedding hall had exploded into a full-blown media firestorm. The first wave came from the paparazzi. Remember those cameras flashing as Meghan was escorted into her car? Within hours, those shots were everywhere. Grainy images of Meghan shielding her face, of suited security men flanking her, of wedding guests in the background frozen mid-gasp. They became instant internet currency. Tabloids didn't hold back. "Gate crash gone wrong," screamed one headline. Another was more brutal. "Duchess of disaster. Meghan booted from Selena's wedding." Social media, of course, had a field day. Memes sprouted like wildfire. Clips of Selena's icy glare paired with captions like, "Not today, Duchess." Edited photos showing Meghan holding a wedding invitation with "denied" stamped across it went viral. TikTok creators reenacted the scene with comedic flair, complete with fake security escorts and gasping wedding guests. The humiliation had crossed borders and languages. Even non-English-speaking outlets were running the story, their headlines just as merciless. And here's the kicker. Selena didn't have to say a single word. She didn't release a statement. She didn't confirm or deny anything. Her silence was its own power. The images, the witnesses, the whispers did the talking for her. By not engaging, Selena looked serene, dignified, the bride who refused to let chaos take away her joy. Meanwhile, Meghan looked desperate, defensive, and entirely out of place. But Meghan wasn't going to stay silent. She never does. Her team scrambled immediately. Insiders whispered about frantic phone calls to publicists, hastily written drafts of clarifying statements, and discussions of how to spin the narrative. One angle floated, that Meghan had been misunderstood, that she had been invited through informal channels, and that her removal was blown out of proportion. But that story didn't stick. Why? Because too many witnesses had seen the truth. Too many guests had whispered the same thing. She was never on the list. And the media smelled blood. Talk show hosts cracked jokes at Meghan's expense. Late-night comedians quipped about the Duchess being the first royal in history to be bounced by security at a Hollywood wedding. Even political commentators jumped in, using the moment as a metaphor for Meghan's fall from grace. The contrast between Meghan and Selena became the narrative. On one side, Selena, America's sweetheart, celebrating love, surrounded by loyal friends and a supportive industry. On the other, Meghan, crashing a wedding she wasn't invited to, escorted out in disgrace, her Hollywood dreams slipping further out of reach. The symbolism was too perfect for the media to resist, and the irony deepened. For years, Meghan had accused the British tabloids of cruelty, of painting her as an outsider. She had fled the UK partly to escape that relentless glare. But here, in the heart of Hollywood, the place she once believed would embrace her, she faced the exact same treatment. Only this time, it wasn't just the tabloids. It was everyone. But let's pause here and ask, why did this story burn so hot, so fast? Why did Meghan's humiliation dominate global coverage when so many other scandals fade overnight? The answer lies in the drama of the image itself. Meghan wasn't just rejected privately. She was escorted out publicly. There's something primal about that visual. It tells a story without words. Power lost, respect stripped away, boundaries crossed and enforced. Meanwhile, Hollywood insiders couldn't resist fanning the flames. Anonymous sources popped up in every outlet, feeding juicy details. Selena was furious, one claimed. She wasn't about to let Meghan ruin her day. Another said, guests were stunned. It was the talk of the night. And yet another insider revealed. Meghan argued with security at first, but eventually she had no choice. Each leak added fuel to the inferno. And Meghan? She was caught in a bind. If she stayed silent, the humiliation would harden into truth. But if she spoke, she risked sounding defensive, petty, or worse, like she was attacking Selena on her wedding day. Her team's first draft of a response was quickly scrapped. Then came the idea of a sympathetic, anonymous friend speaking to a magazine, claiming Meghan had been treated unfairly. That too fell flat. Because the world wasn't buying excuses, the images spoke louder than any spin. Harry's reaction, too, became part of the story. Was he embarrassed? Angry? Supportive? Some outlets claimed he was furious Meghan had put herself in that position. Others whispered he begged her not to go in the first place. Whether true or not, the speculation only made Meghan look more isolated.